X. WVOX.
Stay tuned now for About Face with host Kiron Dawkins, discussing how families can achieve excellence.
Welcome to About Face, brought to you by Westcop. I'm your host, Kiron Dawkins, and we're here to talk about families achieving communities of excellence. Last week in our broadcast, we began to explore the roots of veteran homelessness, and we're going to be continuing on that series today. There has been a national movement for there to be zero homelessness inside of communities all over this great nation. And, you know, it seems almost like an oxymoron when you talk about veterans and homelessness. Those two words should never go together. And as a patriot myself, you know, I really feel that we should have declared this to be a state of emergency here in the nation, and whether that be state by state, whether that be within individual counties, certainly there should be no reason for any veteran or their family to be homeless in this nation after they've served our country faithful. And now there is a process called Functional Zero by which we can bring homelessness to that 0 point where we cannot necessarily prevent crisis as a whole. But what we can do is we can be prepared to mitigate that crisis immediately and make sure that no family remains homeless for any length of time at all. I'm proud to also be the director of the local supportive services for veterans and their families program that operates throughout the Hudson Valley region. We operate in Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, Ulster, Dutchess, Sullivan, and Orange counties. And since the year of 2011, we have served more than 2,000 veterans and their families, bringing them either out of housing crisis or bringing them completely from homelessness to permanent housing. Last week, our two guests talked about their experience. They also talked about their particular work in the Supportive Services for Veterans and Their Families program. I would like to say that there are many initiatives and there are many organizations that we are working with currently in order to make this happen and to make sure that no veteran family is in any way left out. And with that, my guests have just arrived. And we want to quickly get them introduced and begin to discuss today what they consider to be some of the roots of veteran homelessness. And so today I have Burnell Thomas and I have Tanisha Terry. Both are U.S. Armed Force veterans. And they will explain to you a little bit about their rank and their service. And then we want to get into talking about what has happened since discharge. So, Burnell, let's go to you first.
Yes, sir. How are you doing today, Mr. Dawkins?
Doing wonderful.
Good. My name is Burnell Thomas, a United States Marine Corps veteran. I served 12 years in the United States Marine Corps. One of my primary duties were a Marine Corps drill instructor, as well as supply chief for several bases around the country. To answer the question, some of the problems that I see that's a red flag coming out of the military was that the orientation was very limited on what to do. You know, we had to get out of the military pretty much on the orientation of our medical, go back to our home state, or go to a new state where we selected to live. And I found it very stressful trying to reintegrate, not knowing the society, the community, and really what to do. I had family members and friends, but being in the military, you kind of get isolated, and it becomes a different culture of environment. It just was very difficult in the beginning.
We had some guests on last week, and one of them stated that upon discharge, which was a 3-day process,
Yes.
that it was continually pressed upon them that they would never fit into civilian life. Did you have that type of experience? I mean, what was said to you, and how long was your discharge process?
My discharge process was approximately like 30 days. You just go through the offices of signing papers, going to your medical, getting fitted to get out to say that you were healthy. There was no orientation pretty much to talk about the society of which you're about to go into. There was no acclimation. There was no direction to go. You mentioned at one time about coming out of the military and someone taking you and showing you what's really out there available for veterans. That wasn't given to myself and a lot of the veterans that I serve today. We actually do that in our program now. We actually bring them to different spots that are advantageous to helping them. We give them what we call a wraparound.
Wraparound services.
Yes, sir.
In other words, wrapping them up with that warm hug so that they know that they are protected and served through this process, and that's great. It's interesting because you said the discharge process was 30 days.
Yes, sir.
We had one individual said discharge process for them was 3 days. We had another individual that was an officer who said that the process for them was about 6 months because of their high rank. And there were very, very, very different experiences. And so I'm interested in disparities as we continue to talk about what some of the roots of veteran homelessness is. So let me go to our veteran, Ms. Terry. Ms. Terry, can you tell me a little bit about your experience in the Navy and also what your discharge experience was like?
Hi, yes, thank you for having me. Yes, I was in the United States Navy. I served in Japan for 4 years, and I would say that my discharge process was fairly quick. There was not a lot of preparation to help one transition to the civilian sector. It was much like Burnell said when we had to meet the personnel department just to complete, paperwork, and there wasn't much conversation or grooming the person to acclimate into society again as a civilian. I would say it was like living in a whirlwind for a moment because I didn't really know how to what questions to ask. What should I expect when I become just a regular member of society? And so it was, I remember feeling very nervous and just very unprepared. So
Definitely.
Now, what I didn't hear from you, I didn't hear a time frame from you. Would your time frame for discharge, do you have a time frame?
It was much like Burnell stated, 30 days. It was
about
exactly 30 days, actually.
Okay, all right, so 30-day process. So after this 30-day process where, you admit to not necessarily knowing what questions to ask, and Burnell, I believe you talked about not necessarily being prepared, to return to civilian life. Did you have any problems adjusting?
Yes.
Okay, so what problems did you have adjusting, and over what period of time? Because it's interesting that we have some Vietnam vets, that we're servicing now, we're talking about 40 years ago.
Exactly.
That are still adjusting now to things that either took place or did not take place then.
Exactly.
And so for you, what issues have you had with adjusting?
Well, the adjustment came from understanding now that I'm no longer a sergeant, that I no longer have a responsibility over troops, that I no longer have a responsibility that I'm accounted for things that are happening with the operations that I'm responsible for in the office or in the field. Coming out of the military, there's nothing. I'm in charge of nothing. The rank doesn't mean anything any longer. The professionalism, the leadership skills, the administrative authorities that I've had and things that I can do was no longer needed. So I felt really less than a person for a while. I had to find myself again, and I find my identity to find out, what am I good at out here? What can I do? Applying for jobs, things that they offered, I was good at and I was proficient at, but it was demeaning and degrading. I felt less than who I was for the 12 years I've served. Some of the things, jobs that I applied for, they told me I wasn't qualified for. And I'm showing them my DD 214. I'm showing them all the awards I've won. I'm showing the schools I went to. I'm sorry, you need this educational background. You need this. I said, okay, fine. The other thing that wasn't told to me was about my educational benefit that I actually lost. They didn't tell me that I had to use it within 10 years or I was going to lose it. And that hurt me because when I did apply for school, I no longer had that available.
Wow. So in the discharge process, obviously there was the lack of information
Yes.
in terms of training you to return to civilian life.
Yes.
But also that which you had earned, that
Yes.
which you were entitled to. There was no, step by step. This is what has to be done.
Yes, sir.
Or you could lose this by this day. This could be erased if it's
Exactly.
not. Okay. Was the VA there to support you, and in what way? Because we want to be very clear, because we work with the Veterans Administration. They do great work, and they're making great strides in terms of changing now to answer veteran needs. But I think in some respects that they weren't aware of certain things, and I keep finding that our veterans also were not made aware, or think that they only go to the VA if they have a medical problem.
Yes,
or what
sir.
have you. So for you, what was your experience in dealing with the VA, and did you deal with the VA?
My VA experience was I didn't even know where the VA building was. And I didn't find out until I went to the recruiter station to ask some questions, because that's the only connection I had with military, was to go see my recruiter after many of years, which he was gone, but I just went back to show my face, and kind of like that was the only military aspect I knew in the city. When I spoke to the recruiter, he shared with me where the location was, which was miles away from where I lived. So I still didn't know how to get there. So I didn't really get integrated into the VA till many years later, by choice, because my legs started bothering me because I had an injury. And I went to the doctors, and they said, well, you're a veteran, and I didn't have insurance. So they was they gave me the referrals to the VA, and they gave me the doctor that I was going to, the community doctor, gave me the information to the vet building and where it was at in a town that I needed a ride to get to, and it was like 45 minutes away. So, and when I got to the VA, it was a warm reception, but they weren't very knowledgeable about what I needed. I got to run around in the VA. I signed in, sat down for an hour, got back up, wanted to meet a doctor. The doctor wasn't there. I needed to see it was just confusing. And so I sat in the waiting room for approximately like 2.5 hours, 3 hours before a doctor saw me to give me an appointment to come back.
Wow.
That was my first
experience with
experience,
the VA.
and pretty much my last while I was there until recently.
So if you're tuning in now, you're listening to the About Faith broadcast brought to you by Westcop. I am your host, Kiron Dawkins, and we're sitting with U.S. Marine veteran Burnell Thomas and U.S. Navy veteran Tanisha Terry. And we're talking about the roots of veteran homelessness. We've been talking about discharge. And Tanisha, coming to you, tell us some of your problems with adjusting. Did you have problems with adjusting? What were they?
I would say initially I didn't have a great problem. When I finally was discharged from the military, about a year or two afterwards, I did work for the Department of Education for about 4 years. I did have a support system who worked within the Department of Education that helped me to find employment, and I did pretty well there. Unfortunately, towards the end of the 5th year, the city closed a couple of schools, and my school was affected by that. So I found myself out of work. I found myself eventually into homelessness, where at the shelter I met a woman who we were having a conversation, and she asked me, have I ever gone to the military before? She was just sharing some information, and she found out that yes, in fact, I was a member of the military, and she explained to me that there were programs out there to help veterans. And she asked me, was I ever screened at the VA? I told her I had no idea that, what is the VA? I had no idea what the VA was. She explained to me, she gave me the address, she gave me a couple of telephone numbers, she introduced me to a man there who helped with homeless veterans, and that was my first experience ever with the VA. So that experience came about 5 years after my discharge. I never heard of the VA before that. So 5 years after my discharge is when I first came into contact or had any conversation about what the Department of Veteran Affairs was.
Wow, I'm flabbergasted. I mean, not to be a veteran myself, I would never have anticipated being in the military, and not even knowing, that the VA existed. Nevertheless, that it would be a type of go-to place. And so let me ask you, did you have strong family networks to return to? Or, is there anything that would have made the process easier or better for you and your family? Did it cause stress, issues with the family?
Yes. The thing that I found out was that I outgrew my family and my friends. When I came back home, I was a different person. They were still my sisters and brothers, but they were doing things that was questionable for me to do because of I was grounded in rules and regulations and bylaws, and I had to be on time. I didn't stay out late because I knew how I had to function when I went to work. They was up all night. They was doing whatever. It was a free-for-all, and I felt isolated because I didn't do what they did in the beginning. And eventually, I became acclimated. I kind of was isolated for a while. I kind of stayed to myself, and I started integrating with a certain brother here and there, a certain sister, but I didn't function well with the whole family because I'd been away so long. I didn't know them when I returned. I had children that I really focused on, getting back to understanding who they were because they were young. So that was my primary goal, was to really, reintegrate with my son and my daughter at the time, because they were at their age when I left. They left, me, and we kind of separated. But it was difficult. It was difficult. And
is there anything that could have been done to prepare your family for you?
Yes.
Or to prepare you for the family?
Yes.
What would you say is a key thing that maybe could have happened?
I could have been prepared to understand some of the things that I would be facing when I get out, the difference of how people were reacting and thinking. And my family there could have been some counseling put in place or some type of support system put in place that they can get to understand who I was as a veteran coming home, and integrate that and bring it both together and say, now, these are some of the things you're going to face when you meet your son, your husband, or father, whoever, if they're at that age to understand it. And they were sharing with me, listen, you're not going to see the society the same way. That was stripped from you when they went to boot camp. You were isolated from day one in boot camp, and you let back out free to do whatever it is you needed to do, which was confusing. So that could have been put in place to make it a little more clear what I was going to face. Slow process allowed me to go to the community that I lived in, to integrate a little slower, and come back to the military, to my safe haven, and gradually go out and have counseling with the family members and a counselor, and return back to my safe haven for at least a good year.
And so, Terry, what about your family network and the process for your family, and what could have been made easier?
I would say that, first, I just want to start out by saying that on the upswing of this challenge, when it comes to transitioning and discharges, is that you come out with the confidence that you can do whatever it is that you need to do. It's just about not having the structure. You have to get used to the fact that you do not have the structure that you were once used to. The military is very structure-oriented, and there's a chain of command, and there are people always laying out to you these, for lack of a better term, rules and regulations that you should live by. And so then when you're out there in the civilian sector, you have to create your own structure. So for me, stepping back into family life, I had to figure out who I was and how to develop my own structure for the woman that I am now. I went into the service fairly young, and then I come out a woman with a child and all these other responsibilities. So that was the challenging thing for me, to find out where am I going to start to build a structure for myself. And then from there on, in my experience, I found that I was able to excel, but you need the tools, because you cannot build without the tools. So for me, If someone would have introduced me to the VA much earlier, I would have known where to turn. Maybe I would not have become homeless for a spell. And maybe I would have not had such a hard time finding other employment and so on and so forth.
So you both work for an award-winning SSVF program, and you have made many inroads to making sure that veterans would not be homeless, would not go into homelessness in terms of losing their housing, or if you find them in homelessness, you're getting them out as quickly as possible. Can you tell me just a little bit about what type of conditions are you finding veterans living in, and what type of interventions is SSVF making on their behalf?
Wow, there's so many different things. Every vet that walks in has a different situation. Some are similar. We find them couch surfing, living with family, and sometimes they have to stay out of the house all day and probably just have a place to sleep on the floor in the house, or some have actually slept in their garages, in their cars during the winter months, in the parks, anywhere, abandoned buildings. They come in all types of situations with their pride and their ego stepped on. Some have had mental health issues that they haven't addressed. And so once we get them to sit down and we start and prepare intake, we find all these things that are now being revealed. And each case is different and unique, but we have a policy and we have an intake procedures that narrows it down and fine tunes it exactly to what that individual's need is. So it's to say that we help them to find apartments, to find an adequate housing where they can lay down for a night and have a roof over their head with heat, whether it's in a shelter, a resting spot, or a restaurant, or a place where they can eat, a warming shelter, they call it. Shelters where they can have food during the day, and we try to give them a wraparound service where they can get medical attention. We try to give them the services and references where they can start to understand who they really are as veterans. We give them introduce them to vet, other veterans that are going through something similar, to talk about their issues. We try to get them back on track to know that they are valuable, and that because they are down today, that tomorrow is another day, that we're working to help them get back on their feet to be sustainable. We give them employment opportunities. We have a list of employment opportunities that we help them do their resumes to get them back into the workforce. I can go on, and every day is different, and each need is different.
And Terry, what's your experience like? What conditions are you finding veterans living in?
Disoriented. They're mainly disoriented. These families or the single veteran, he or she is mainly disoriented. They're looking for some balance. They're struggling with their family and financial planning, how to plan, how to take hold and ownership of their finances. They're struggling with substance use. And when you're in the military, there is some, you work very hard, and then you have liberty, and then you're indulging in, certain activities, drinking, and then, when you work so hard, when you have off, you drink, and then they come out of the service, and they're still practicing some of those behaviors. And then they're spiraling downhill because you don't know how to catch that again. You don't know how to catch yourself again. I'm noticing that they're having a hard time translating their expertise in leadership. And all of the hard work that you've done while you're in the service, what does it mean now that I'm in the civilian sector and I need to get a job and hold on to a job? And most of all, managing their finances and their family, and how to keep that going. It's a very stressful environment when you're in the military. So when you have to manage your family, when you're not in the military, how do you do that? How do you convey that, you still have some memories, or you're still on high alert, I guess. How do you relax so that,
Well, one of the most alarming things that began to come across my desk ultimately was that I was seeing the veteran family dismembered. And many of these problems that you have expressed didn't just lead to homelessness, didn't just lead to substance abuse, didn't just lead to rental arrears, but in fact began to dismember the family, was destroying the family. And there have not been, until SSVF and a few other initiatives begin to emerge, there have not been wraparound services for the family. Okay. And so as we're here in About Face, interested in families achieving communities of excellence, that's really what it's about, finding how do we provide services for the veteran and the family collectively, so that as you talked about, Burnell, with discharge, the family was not prepared. The family was not ready to receive you, and you were not ready to receive them. I've learned that there are many different familial experiences, because it's different for the families that spend time on base, that travel. It's different for the families that kind of get left behind. It's different for the families that may start right before the person exits the military, or for the families that start right upon exit. But these are all veteran families. They come in all different types and shapes, and there's not one general fix, but I think that the key thing is being able to disseminate information and to loop them in fully into what's happening and to the experience of the veteran, so that they know how to look for things, look for signs, and also work into support. And so, unfortunately, we have come to the end of our broadcast, but I've had a great time with Burnell and Terry, and I got good news for you. If you're listening out there, we're going to have them back.
Thank you.
Because there are some things that we didn't get into. You would not know that they both are African American or black, and there are more than 50% of those that we're finding in trouble that happen to identify themselves in that way, and I want to talk about that on our next show. Yes, so we are About Face. We are brought to you by Westcop. You can go to www.westcop.org to get more information and donate now. And remember, when you go to donate, think local, think community, think Westcop. And we thank you for tuning in. See you next week.
Season's greetings
from AM 1460 WVOX New Rochelle and WVOX World.